How's everybody doing? Good. All right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. And I do want to start, Martin, with you about the Business Roundtable statement. Because I think when they came out, we were all like, wait, what? It's not just about shareholders. We've certainly been having those conversations before they officially came out. But now they're thinking about employees, the environment, their suppliers. Yeah. All of this matters. What did you think about initially when that statement came out? What did you think?
Well, we had a little bit of prior warning. We knew something was cooking because we had met several times before, in the start of the year with Josh and his team. They were just asking the right questions about what is the purpose of business today? What do you think it is? I mean, Just Capital, as you may know, we survey the public on what they think companies should be doing. And we've done that for 4 years now, actually 5 years. We have a huge amount of data on what people think a just company looks like.
Right.
And so they were very interested in that point of view. What are ordinary folks, what is Main Street America saying about big corporations? So
why were they asking, though?
Why were they asking?
Why do you,
Well, because I think what they're trying to do is put down a marker that says, back in the 80s, we had, the era of Gordon Gekko and Wall Street and shareholder primacy, that was the Milton Friedman Chicago School prevailing thought.
We praised it.
That's what, exactly. They embraced that, right? The shareholder view. And I think this was a recognition that is no longer valid. That companies today, if you run a business, or any organization, frankly, you are there to create value for multiple stakeholders, and it's not a zero-sum game. Investing in my workers, investing in my suppliers, investing in the communities where I operate doesn't come at the expense of my shareholders. And so that's the reality, and that you hear that from CEOs. I'm thinking of Mark Benioff, I'm thinking of Dan Schulman at PayPal. This is now an increasingly loud drumbeat. So I think it was more a recognition that, okay, it's time. It's time we put down a new North Star for what is the purpose of a corporation in America today.
You've been doing your company.
By the way, sorry.
What?
I don't think they expected to get as much attention as they did, which is the flip side. I think they thought this would be, it's August. People are on vacation.
We'll just slide
Who's
it in.
going to notice? Slide it in. And I know this is very important to Jamie Dimon. We'll see how important it is to Doug McMillon coming in as the new chair in January in Walmart. But I think they were surprised by the attention that it got and the criticism from both sides leveled at this. On the right, like, this is socialism through the back door. And on the left, this is just purpose washing.
Right. All right, so I want to ask you, because you've been doing your company, it's been about 5 years, right, that you've been taking this surveys. What's changed in terms of how we think about responsible investing? What's just? I mean, obviously, a lot has changed for the Business Roundtable to actually come out and say what they did, but I'm just curious.
I would say now the fundamental shift that I've noticed is if you're an investor or if you're a CEO or in the C-suite, if you are not ahead or on top of these issues, you're behind the curve now. And I think 5 years ago, certainly when I started out in sustainable investing in the late 90s, where you could fit the entire industry into this room, there it was just, this is sort of like, somewhat crazy talk. Now, I think I meant what I said. I think if you're not on top of this, you're behind the curve. So. And I think what's happened in the last couple of years since the 2016 American presidential election is everything's been attenuated. And now social issues are much more relevant to CEOs today, much more relevant to business competitiveness, and therefore much more relevant to investors.
Because politics has put it front and center?
Because we as a society are shifting. We value...
What's different about me versus my dad versus my mom versus my grandparents?
Well, awareness of, I don't know you, but I don't know your family, so I don't want to speak about in personal terms.
In terms of our awareness.
Generationally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think if you go back a couple generations, I think families used to take maybe better care of themselves because you'd have multi-generations maybe living together. Like, you thought about that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You know, it's an interesting point. Is this a return to some values that we used to run our businesses by, you know, in pre-1970s?
Right. We had moral compasses.
Yeah, and I was reading the General Motors annual report from 1964 or something a few weeks ago, and you can see that. You know, we value all of our stakeholders. It's right there. So in many ways, it's a throwback, but also many things are new. Our access to information, our awareness of social issues. My children, I have four kids who are older. They're not willing to trade their values or their sense of purpose for where they go to work.
Right.
Nor should they.
Right.
So I think that's what's changing.
I do want to ask a question to all of you in terms of stakeholders, because I know this is something that Martin looks at so closely. So pull out your phones, if you will. And the question is, type GRIF2019.app in terms of live polling. What stakeholders should matter most to a company? And your choices are workers, customers, communities, environments, shareholders. These are all stakeholders that you look at. And I'm curious, let's see what you folks think should matter the most. And it looks like customers coming up in a big way. Shareholders also important. So customers, it looks like, and shareholders, pretty significant. Now, some might say, Martin, that it all matters. And as you said, you have talked to the public specifically, asked them very similar question.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think we have a slide to bring that up, just to kind of compare what you guys think versus what, when you talk to the public, you ask them to actually prioritize it, right?
Yeah, so our survey is fully representative of the American population, for one thing. We do focus groups, we do different types of polling all around the country. And, you know, essentially what we do is sort of ask people, what defines a just company? What does a just company do? And beneath each one of those 5 major headers is a set of specific criteria that we track big companies against. So that's what Just Capital does. But what you see here are the 2019, so these are hot off the press, the priorities of the American people when you say to them, what stakeholders matter in terms of a just company? And I think, so I'm looking at the differences between the poll inside this room and our poll. I think what we found is that very many people across America are really trying hard to make ends meet. Millions obviously don't make a living wage. Their experience in the workplace is, leaves a lot to be desired, and so their expression of what a just company should be focusing on is through the lens of their work experience, which kind of makes sense.
In many ways.
So that's where I think you see the workers become most important. But interestingly, the other lineups are actually not that different.
No, exactly, because it goes right to customers. I mean, what actually creates a purpose-driven company? Like, where does it start? Like, can you work on all 5 things at once? Like, you work with a lot of well-known companies, and I'm just curious when somebody comes to you and they want to make changes, like what's the first thing you say to them?
So so just to sort of give a bit of context for that, so we track the Russell 1000 companies at an arm's length basis. We're trying to be very data driven. We're just trying to reflect their performance as accurately as we can, and then give that information out to the market so that people can use it to invest in or buy from or work for a just company. And so we, over the last 2 years or so, we've seen the number of companies that we track that are coming to us to say, hey, we're engaging with Just Capital.
Right.
And they engage in many different ways, and I'll explain in a second. That number has effectively tripled in the last 18 months. So we now have like 420 of the Russell 1000 companies in a conversation with us, with our analyst team. So it comes in lots of different ways.
Right.
So some are right at the beginning of their journey, and you might talk to someone in the sustainability department or someone in
HR?
Maybe public policy or HR.
Right.
Those that are further ahead, or further up the curve, I should say, it's a C-suite issue. And they're sort of getting it from their investors. They want to, from their competitors. This is about performance, so they want to be seen as being a leader. It could be very focused on talent. It kind of depends on the industry.
Right.
You know, if they're it's a high environmental impact industry.
But you have to have the C-suite on board, or no?
You have to have the C-suite on board if you're really going to push for a leadership, role in this now, because I think what we're seeing is leaders are now connecting the dots between, the sustainability people that used to do their thing down the corridor, over there.
A cute little group in the corner.
Yeah. The folks in Washington who are, representing us there are marketing teams, huge marketing budgets now targeted at purpose. So I think what C-suites are doing and what CEOs who embrace this are doing is really pulling this all together and saying, okay, how is this an overarching framework for how we run our company?
What's interesting is, and I highly recommend that you go to your website and play around.
JustCapital.com.
JustCapital.com. And play around with some of the criteria and the different stakeholders. Because what's interesting is, depending on the stakeholder, a different company comes up number one. And I played around with it a little bit. Walmart, number one when ranked on how the company supports its communities. So that can be fair taxes, local jobs, human rights, U.S. job creation. When ranked according to customers as the most important stakeholder, then Apple came up in that survey as the number one. Environment as the number one stakeholder, Workday took the top spot. If it was shareholders was the most important stakeholder, then Alcoa came up number one. So I guess my question is, can a company have it all? How easy is it to make sure you're serving all those stakeholders and then also financially be a profitable, growing company?
It's a journey, not a destination. There is no goalpost that you get through and now you're just, and before that you weren't just. All of those things are changing. The demands on companies are changing. Customer expectations are changing. New workers, new talent entering the workforce, their expectations are changing. So it's a constant process, as in any business, of competition and performance. So I think what this does is say, okay, for any company, how are we doing now? Let's say I'm a CEO, I've signed the business roundtable, I've just said to the world that my purpose, the purpose of the company that I run, is to create value for these stakeholders. All right, so how am I going to measure that? How am I doing relative to my competitors?
Right.
What do I need to do tomorrow to get better on these things? And where am I getting the data? Like, I'll give you an example. One of the things we track is how many companies have done a pay equity analysis. Not many is the answer.
The percent is is it 6%?
Single digit, yeah. That's published. So Microsoft, which is our number one company overall, a real leader on that issue, and they have published, that work. And Mark Benioff at Salesforce is another famous example of someone who, didn't know there was a problem, measured something, which, by the way, measuring something doesn't create the problem, right? So he then could act.
Right.
So I think you're seeing more and more companies just sort of start to ask those questions, and that's the journey. Gathering the data, measuring it, figuring out what to do, acting, and now making progress. And that's the importance of the business roundtable's statement, because it's now set these goalposts. Okay, I'm going to measure you on value creation for your workers.
Right. And I actually believe, in terms of media coverage, this becomes part of our conversation with companies, that it's not just about how'd you do in that quarter, it's how are you doing on these metrics. I often have it about diversity. Yep. I do want to bring up another slide if I can. We've got a second slide, because I guess what I'm trying to get my head around is what happens when there's a financial crisis. Mm-hmm. Do you all of a sudden say, well, wait a minute, we got to get our financial situation in order, so we're going to not worry so much about the environment this quarter or this year? I just wonder. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But This slide, let's talk about this a little bit, because this does show that those companies that are just companies, what's their performance? Or at least the results that you guys have found.
We've found, so the headline, as you can all see, is that our top performing companies, not just overall, but in every sector, pay their people more money, have more women on their boards and senior management, are more generous philanthropically, have a lower environmental impact, and have a higher return on equity.
Pay 31% more.
Yeah.
Are 32% more likely to have established environmental policies, have 25% more women on the board, pay a living wage to at least 11% or 11% more of their workers.
So the prevailing narrative is that if I do, as you just said, if I do those things, this is coming out of shareholders' pockets.
Right.
And we've just not found that to be the case. And this is obviously a headline sort of grabbing slide, but we've done a ton of work, which we call our Just Alpha work, which I'm happy to give. I know this is an audience of investors. We're a nonprofit, so all of our work is out there for anyone to use. We want you to use it. Our Just Alpha work drills down into operating margins, price to book ratios. Are we seeing markets give premiums to more just companies? What is the business case? And the reason why that's important is you have to be able to, when you talk about these issues, you have to be able to make the business case that it's in a company's long-term enlightened self-interest to invest in these stakeholders. And that goes right into the heart of the quarterly earnings call. We actually started something called a quarterly just call with companies. We did the first one a month ago with PayPal to go right at that issue because we felt like the narrative itself needed to shift on that.
Well, and as we see in this, as you said, it's got a great headline, but it's a 6%, I think it was, roughly higher return on equity.
It's over a 5-year period.
So I'm just curious, for the investors in the room, what are the questions they need to be asking of companies in this environment?
Well, I think first of all, you need to try and figure out, are the companies that you're focused on or you're investing in or in your portfolios, how are they even thinking about this? Is this still the old sort of like, oh, this is a luxury item, sustainability, responsible corporate behavior, something we do when times are good.
Right.
But it really doesn't drive our success. When we're hunkering down and under competitive threat, that's the first thing that goes. I think that's the yesterday's narrative. So how does a company think about creating value for investors? How does it think about creating value and its performance, measuring its own performance across all these stakeholders? And what is the business case? As investors, when I was in private equity, we're always looking at what was really going to influence, our discounted cash flow analysis, our view on whether companies were actually going to be able to create competitive moats around their business and really retain the best talent, and all of that was going to translate to shareholder value. Now I run a nonprofit called Just Capital. I don't think any differently. I think these are core business performance issues. So I think you would want to know that your companies are, ahead of the curve, and you feel like there's a strong business case to be made.
And is it safe to say that the wave for all companies are going this way? I know Business Roundtable said that, and we'll see. I still have a million conversations about still not enough women on boards or not enough diversity at companies, even though we see all of the studies that are out there.
We're nowhere near where we need to be. Okay. Let's be clear. You're absolutely right. But your healthy skepticism is what is going to drive progress. I think that, I look at that and I say, that's fine. Your boss, Mike, has built a pretty good company providing the market with information about how companies perform. So we need a Bloomberg for justness. So the market can then kick in, right? The market can do what the market does, which is reward and punish. Like, I don't want to invest in companies that treat their workers terribly or have an unfunded liability because they're not thinking about environmental risks. That to me is an investment issue.
So how many in the audience, show of hands, are willing to give up some performance for a company that is doing the right thing to all of these 5 stakeholders?
Wait, I didn't say you got to give up performance.
But no, some performance. Well,
I don't think you do.
You don't think you have to
I don't think you do.
Do you think you have to give up some performance?
No.
I love that. Okay. That's great.
That's it. So that if I'm now looking for, I'm only thinking about the investment case, right? I don't actually care about the mission. Let's just put that aside. We are a room full of Gordon Geckos in 2019. We're just focused on return. Greed is good, but not if it comes to the expense. And it's all about how you think about that. It's sort of like what creates value. How do you define success? Those are the foundational issues.
I want to take some questions from the audience. I want to bring in Lauren, but it's interesting because you and I were having a conversation in the back about how I feel like politically right now capitalism is under attack.
Absolutely.
And I have tons of conversations, especially with younger generations, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, this is kind of what this country is about, and think about all the good that has also been done as a result of it. I don't know.
Well, there is definitely a polarized debate, as is every debate in this country right now, about capitalism and markets. And the truth is that if people don't believe that markets are working for them, helping them raise their families, put food on the table, give a sense of dignity in the workplace, then that does not going to end well. And too many in America today feel like that. They feel like capitalism doesn't work for them.
And understandably so.
And understandably so. So this is the fault lines in capitalism that we have to fix. So we're not saying unfettered capitalism is awesome, everything's great, there's nothing to fix. On the contrary, you've got to get capitalism onto a more just track, which is why we're called Just Capital, but that's the whole point.
Where's Lauren?
Right here.
Go.
You mentioned you'd worked in private equity. Is private equity paying enough attention to ESG?
Good question.
It's been a few years since I was in private equity, but I would say...
Elizabeth Warren doesn't think it's working right.
You know, I think people think private equity is like one thing, and the truth is it isn't. There are many private equity firms that are expressly focused on ESG and sustainability. So I think that absolutely there are many companies that do that. Now, people tend to think of the big guys, right? So KKR, Carlyle Group, TPG, what are they doing? You know, I'd say they're on a journey too. I think they're trying to figure it out. So do I think they pay too little attention? I don't know, but I certainly don't think that, you know, they've reached a point where ESG and sustainability is driving forward their core investment strategies.
How do the Just 100 rankings compare to the valuations of those companies?
I have to get back to you on that. We know that the Just 100. You know what? I'm going to come. I don't know who asked that question, but I'm happy to come back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to say something that I think is right, but I want to be sure about it, so I can provide actual numbers.
Or tweet it
on
out
that,
later.
Tweet it out using our hashtag.
I'll tweet it out. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Is there anyone from Just in the room? I did invite a colleague. Okay, no. Sorry, it's fine.
They didn't show up. One more. I think that we have time for. Yeah, let's take one more quickly. In your data, do you see that people are more interested in data around environmental, social, or governance factors? What are they looking at the most?
People are more interested in social issues, for sure. I think there's a reason for that, which is in the ESG world, you know, I look back, you know, E and G were like the starting points. We had a lot of focus on that. Environmental issues are relatively easy to measure.
Right.
They tend to be numbers and quantitative. S is very tricky, you know. It's how people feel at work. It's how people feel like they're being paid. It's about surfacing data on compensation and benefits and how employees are experiencing their employer like that. Those are very, very sensitive issues, and so it doesn't surprise me that A, there's less work done on that. B, people are more interested in that as a new frontier of ESG, and thirdly, that they're more sort of rooted in core business performance. So, by which I mean, when we rank companies on living wage and we ask them, hey, can you give us your wage data? Guess what they say?
No.
No. They're hugely competitive issues. Now, in the late 90s, when I was at
Wouldn't that
Innovet,
be wild? I mean, you kind of get some of it through Glassdoor and so on and so forth.
you have to model it. You have to model it. And what we do is we model it, and then we show the companies everything, right?
Yeah.
So we're totally transparent. And the companies will say, no, that's wrong, or no, actually, the minimum wage is like $15.50 or whatever. So they come back. So there's a dialogue, and then we can tweak it if we think that we need to. But that's I would say the S is where people are more interested, and it's also the hardest one.
I want you to just to wrap up, answer this question for me, or finish this sentence for me. A company that's financially performing big time, firing on all cylinders, and yet not so great to employees, not a lot of diversity, environment not important to the company either. It will not be able to exist in blank years.
Maximum 10.
10 years. All right, on that note, Thank you, Martin.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody. Really appreciate it.